those of you who don't know me, I'm Jana Javornik. I'm the visiting researcher at the Institute of Contemporary History. And it is a really great pleasure to introduce an external speaker today, who's been a very long time friend, right? Yeah. So I think she's been my friend before we became scholars. Yeah. I was a policymaker, so
that's
a
true.
couple of careers back, so we go way back. So that I won't be spilling beans around our friendship here, right? But I'm really, really glad to call Tanja Devetak as my longtime friend. So Tanja, without further ado, I won't be giving any big introductions. I have something really nicely written about fast fashion, about you being an innovator, you being a public intellectual and a scholar, right?
Yeah.
And coming from Slovenia in the world of fashion, which I think is quite an achievement. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Jana. Yeah, it's true. Slovenian fashion is not really something to be well known in the fashion industry, in the fashion landscape globally, and even in Europe. Europe, it's less known. Maybe it's this has something to do with the fact that Slovenian fashion has never been really systematically researched or been the subject or issue of the more deeper research. I'm coming from fashion design. Primarily, I was fashion designer, having my own fashion label, and it might be the reason why I started to research Slovenian fashion, because as student of the fashion design faculty, I didn't know much and didn't learn much about the Slovenian fashion. And this probably was the reason why I started to do my research on Slovenian fashion. So Slovenian, first, just to have a short overlook, Slovenian fashion is at the moment, by the Statista, well, the average Slovenian citizen will spend around 600 euros per person to buy clothing. So this is the market size. Secondly, we buy around 51 pieces, which is regardless, you have to say that only 11 euros per piece is willing to spend. So this is roughly just the size of the market and also the character of the Slovenian market that we are facing now. But how did we come to this stage? I've looked different contexts of the Slovenian fashion just to have the systematic overview where we are. First, I've looked at temporal context. I researched a geographical context, which is very important for the Slovenian fashion. Then the third one was economic context, following by the social context, and then political context, which was also very important due to the circumstances with the Slovenian fashion, and the cultural context, and the last one, the sustainable context, which astonishingly didn't come very late in the Slovenian fashion, because the Slovenian clothing industry, as you will see, has been sustainable a long time ago, but never really knew this how to market it worldwide. First, history of fashion in Slovenia. I divide it in 4 pillars: production, representation, education, and also the distribution. You will see, but it's not the main reason. And then I also divided the history of Slovenian fashion in different decades, according to the systematic changes that were happening over those decades. So the first period was post-war industrialization, and then followed by the structural shifts of the 60s, and then in the 70s it was the great boom of the Slovenian fashion. But then in the 80s, of course, for some economic and also social and political instabilities, the 80s was very unstable for the fashion. But of course, after the changes in the beginning of the 90s, with the rise of the independent designers and studios, and then now we are facing the integration of sustainable practices in the years that we are living now. So this distribution is still very poor in the fashion history, and this is the pillar which I wasn't looking that much at the moment, because it doesn't really influence much on the development of Slovenian fashion. First, I looked at the emergence of the clothing industry after the Second World War, where the first emphasis was on the formation of the socialist society. That happened on the structural integration of the industries on the basis of the manufacturers that already existed pre-war. So they nationalized those industries and started to produce clothing without any design, of course, integrated in the process. Of course, the idea was building the economically effective system. This was still at the time a desire, but a very great economic numbers has happened at that time. Of course, the people were very keen on building the new society in the clothing industry. Also, very important was how to form the clothing culture, which would reflect the cultural specifics of the region. Due to that, also some books were written how to educate people what is the clothing culture, how to dress properly according to the trends which were at the time in the West. And also, which was very important at the time, employment of female labor in underdeveloped geographic areas. And you will see some factories has been established because of the integration of the female labor on those undeveloped geographical areas. In difference to the pre-war situation, other regions has developed after the Second World War, and those were Goriška region, Dolenjska region, Posavje and Pomurje region. Before the war, there were just two main cities connected with the clothing and textile industry, Maribor and Kranj. They were really the industry was heavily developed. So this is how it looked, the industry location geographically at the time after the Second World War in the first decade till the 50s. With the red points are marked the cities and the locations of the industry, which was based on the manufacturer units established and worked before the Second World War. But with the green ones are marked the units, the production units which were established later on in the 50s. With the idea to integrate female population and integrate as a working force. So many of them, they were decentralized. They haven't been in big cities, but also in very small places all around the geographic area of Slovenia at the time. I will speak later about this division 30-70, which is very important for that time. In this first period, the management was state-run, and also it's important that the textile industry administration of the People's Republic, so-called at that time of Slovenia, was some kind of general institution that was leading all the necessary decisions. After that was followed by the central planning management, but which is important for what is important at that period for the textile and clothing industry is reduction of units from 14 to 5. They wanted to integrate those units that they are not so in high numbers, and they couldn't control, so they reduced the units from 14. The idea was to reduce them from 14 to 5 altogether. Of course, at the beginning of the 50s, it is very important for the development of the clothing industry in the perspective of including the fashion design within their operations, is that the management came into the back, and the decision making came back into the factories. And at that time, some of the early fashion designers started to design their own collections. Prior to that, companies, factories just manufacture clothing, so they were not doing any designs within their factories. They were buying like models from abroad, and they were just the production units. But with those ladies, Darja Krušić in Rešica, Saša Zrinci in Almira, and Marta Hrovatin in Angora, those Rešica, Almira, and Angora were at the time very important production units or labels, and they were not yet educated as fashion designers, but they had a very good feeling, aesthetic feeling, and they have some knowledges, and they decided within the factory management to give them the opportunity to develop their own collection. So they started to realize that fashion design is very important for their growth. This 30-70 is important from from a perspective of manufacturing method, because at the time in the West, the industrial production was vice versa. So they produced more on industrial scale in comparing to Slovenia, where it was vice versa. Only 30% of production was industrialized. Everything was still custom made at the time. So they tried to change in the more industrial production way, especially because in the clothing industry there is almost quarter of the material. If you are producing a custom made base, you lose almost quarter of the material. It's just waste. So it's much more effective if you do it industrial production. So after this period, in the 50s, it was there were structural changes in the 60s. Important for the growth of the clothing industry. Of course, the general circumstances were also supportive for this kind of growth, because the GDP grew by 30% annually. Also investments in the new production units and its equipment modernization. Many of factories started to build new facilities over that time and that period, and also buying new equipment, because the existing one was very old. In some cases still from before the Second World War. Also, they realized that the greater specialization in production is needed, so they had to specialize in which level of fashion they are going to enter, and also increasing the number of employees, especially, of course, the female workforce in remote areas. The number of employees grew, but which is sadly the level of education didn't follow that. So many of those women who were employed in the factories had only primary school finished, and this led later on the establishment of secondary schools in the areas. And which is important for the development of fashion in Slovenia is establishment of sample departments, which didn't exist prior to that. There were like small units where they developed different products for the collections, and they also progress in the integration of fashion design within their working environment. In this period, there is a big growth of domestic markets, so people could buy more clothing, the local clothing, but also the exports were growing over this period. Those are the numbers for the Pletenina factory, which was based here in Ljubljana, and this factory was established after the Second World War with the nationalization on the basis of the manufacturers owned by Hribar before the family of Hribar before the Second World War. Those are some examples of designs from that time, from Delta. Those are the names of the companies that were very highly regarded at the time, like Delta, Tovarna, Pletenina, Sežana, Rešica. And in the 60s, after the establishment of the secondary school for fashion design, this was the first educational program in Slovenia. In the 60s, of course, first fashion designers started to be employed in the factories, and that meant also that the fashion design, the collections, the production of those collections really started to be more developed. Some of those companies were later on integrated in the bigger factories like Delta. Mura later has integrated it within their system. The boom of the clothing industry in the 70s followed, of course, because of the growth, the economic growth, the idea how important it is to have our own clothing industry, our own fashion, but also because at the time people started to appreciate domestic fashion. So they had the chance to go abroad to buy also foreign brands, but somehow within the society, the designers, those ladies who were working with those companies, started to develop collections that gained recognition within the society. Those are some of the names of these respectful fashion designers that worked for the companies like Vesna Kavarić for Almira, Metka Vrhunc, Industry of Leather Vrhnika, Industry Osnja Vrhnika, Sasha Zrinc, who started with Almira in the north, Radovljica of Slovenia, and then later on moved to Rešica, and then finished her career as her own label, Vida Slokar in Ideal, in Gorica. Many other names as well. In Mura, Ika Fuis, first designer that was employed in Mura. Mileva Gavrilović in Tovarna Pletenin Sežana, Jelka Kermauner in Rešica, Ana Maria Vernik, firstly in Jutranka, in Sevnica, near the southern part of the Slovenia, and then she moved to Beti. Jelka Novak from Labot, Marta Hrovatin, first Angora, and we have also Ana Logonder that she worked for Kroj in Kranj. There's just few of those names, but what is common for them is that they have been like first, second, or third generation of the fashion designers who finished this first school for fashion design in Slovenia, based here in Ljubljana, and still operates, and still is educating young people. And this led to development of different level of collections. which were, of course, also then awarded on the very important fairs at the time. Not just domestic, two main fairs were one in Ljubljana and the other one was in Belgrade, which was very internationally based, but also on in other fairs that also abroad. Rashica gained many awards at the time, the largest fair in Leipzig, and then Vesna Gabarczyk in Brno. And they really wanted to open their collections and compare them to other fashions abroad. This one in the middle is Industrija usnja vrhnika, who Metka Vrhunc, the designer, also gained one of those awards for the collection. And about this last one, Gorenjska oblačila, I will talk even later, because this is a very good example how Slovenian fashion at that time already in the 70s was following the global trends, or the European trends, more to say, although the global trends are equal European trends in fashion still. Gorenjska oblačila were just the producer of this collection, but it's very interesting because the one textile company, Prebold, has invited Slovenian fine artists. Probably will know Jemec, the name. They're really respectful ones, and they designed patterns, which then later on the produced material, established fashion designers did the designs for the clothing, not just Slovenian ones. Also, there was Richard Gumzej is from Croatia, from Zagreb, and the Gorenjska oblačila produced the collection. So this was an example following the trend. If you know, in the late 60s, Yves Saint Laurent did this. Many of the collections which were inspired by the artists at the time, and also collaborated with Andy Warhol on the paper dresses. So this just show how very integrated in trends Slovenian fashion at the time was, although many think, in many cases, they say like Slovenian fashion is just one in the East, being very Unitarian, but on the contrary, I have to say. So the 80s were, of course, unstable conditions in the clothing industry, not just economically, but also according to talks with fashion designers, also the inner circumstances within the employees, within the companies, there were no ideal relationship within that. But of course, also other things happened, like shortage of raw materials, ban on importing equipment. Then we have intensifying exports, although this didn't help that they could buy equipment because it was forbidden. Also market saturation, and then insufficient specialization of production. Although they prior to that they started the specialization, but then because of the growth of units, production units, facilities, so everybody were producing everything, and on the market there was just too many things, too many products, like we are facing now, overloading with the products, but not enough capacity to buy or to see what is the difference between them. So this was a big issue in the 80s. And also they started to the introduction of marketing and market segmentation. This is it was very clumsy at the time, so they started like many new lines. 1 year, 2, and then the other year, and next year 3 new lines, and they changed their mind and they switched to, I don't know, 3 another ones, and the previous ones they abolished. So it was just a mix of ideas what to do, and they all hoped like the marketing and market segmentation is this magical tool that will help them to overcome those situations in the 80s. But it came the beginning of the 90s and the change of social, political, economic system, and also it's followed the decline of the industry, but the emergence of independent fashion studios. These independent fashion studios emerged because of the establishment of the higher education program of the fashion design in the late 70s. So everything is connected with the education. Education is very crucial to the development of the fashion in Slovenia. Those are the first companies that were bankrupt: Topar, Tovarna Pletenin, Sežana, and Pletenina. This was the time where when all the factories had to go through the transition of the ownership. The whole 90s they were struggling the changing of the ownership, but they didn't succeed. Already at the beginning they struggled and they closed their doors. Some of the brands still exist, but they like Topar, but this doesn't really have any real connection with what Topar used to be. But on the right are the names of these independent fashion studios that started from the late, they were established from the late 80s until till the end of the 90s. Some of them still exist, and we can be very proud of them that 30 plus years they are still on the market, they still do their work. Some of them, they don't exist anymore, although at the time they really were crucial for development of the fashion in Slovenia. One I would like to point out, this is Pro Arts Vivendi. This is something for this very special, for special globally, but it's happening in Slovenia. This kind of a mix of different roles within the fashion. Pro Arts Vivendi was a brand established by the editorial board of the media, of the fashion media. So this doesn't really happened outside Slovenia. This is a specialty for Slovenia, but we do have some this kind of I would say in inverted commas specialties which are not helpful in the establishing of a stable fashion system. So those you can see those are the designs from these independent fashion designers that at the time were they had the level of education was higher. So the higher education started at the end of the 90s. And also you can see the aesthetics, which is totally different. At the time, also the fashion photographers started to develop, to grow. And many of them really were just working in the fashion business. And this is also a very important profession if you want to have a proper fashion system. So Vodeb was a special brand, which was run by Matjaž and Marta Vodeb. But they were the first one of the independent fashion studios that tried to, they were hiring fashion designers who designed for them then the collections. And Pro Arts Vivendi, for the brand, designed the editorial board itself. So they were like Nada Vodušek, who was writing for the Arts Vivendi, the media, but then she also designed for their own collections, and the production was led by the still existing clothing industry. Some very mixed situation we had in the 90s. And Raj, the knitting studio, which still exists, this is the photo from the 1996, but they were more or less the first or the second one. They already established their collections. First time they showed already in the 1989, and they still are on the market. So global challenges in local conditions after the 2000, we are facing still those challenges, but of course local conditions are very specific. As you can see, many new labels has been established. Some of them still exist, some of them don't, or they change their names and rebrand them. But what is important that also labels with the support, like supporting this core work of fashion, like clothing, were established, like for the shoes, leather fashion accessories, jewelry, or handbags. And this is important. So many others, independent studios, also started to work now in this period after the 2000. But what is very interesting, but sad at the same time, is that after this legislation has finished, that all the companies have to be, they have to go through the transition of ownership. All those companies, clothing industry has went to bankruptcy, so they stopped existing. So which is interesting that somehow the idea that the problem of the clothing industry was also based on the not knowing who the owner is, actually didn't really show well, because then when everybody, they all knew who the owner was, and still they bankrupt. So, for example, in some cases, there were just 2 new owners, because, you know, the first step of this transition meant that all the employees, all the former employees could be part of the ownership, but then after some time, of course, they were not aware of what to do with that, and they were not really connected anymore with the companies, and they sell to other people, and they were not connected with the companies. They didn't grow with the companies. They just bought it as an investment, and then finalized and followed by the bankruptcy of those companies. So now we are staying without industry, so we don't have any industry, but we do have some, not many, but some independent fashion studios and many fashion designers. If we want to talk about the fashion system in Slovenia, we have to talk also about fashion fairs, fashion weeks, and events, which were in both systems. First was Fashion Fair in Ljubljana, which was established in 1956 and was run till the end of the 90s. And the other one, which was very important for development of the fashion, was Fashion Fair in Belgrade, also in the 2 years after, it was established 2 years after the Fashion Fair in Ljubljana. And also awards on those 2 fashion fairs meant for development of the fashion great opportunity, but also for the consumers. And then thirdly, Moda Fest. This was a very good example. It was internationally, also international Moda Fest. This was a traveling fair, decentralizing fashion, going to places where fashion never comes, like small places, small towns around the country, with the best collections and the best models, with the best production. And they even designed, today we would say, like pop-ups, like pop-up furniture, so they could sell in those places. And of course, Fashion Bazaar later on. Today, in the recent years, we had Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week Ljubljana, we had Philips Fashion Week, and from 1914, it's every year Ljubljana Fashion Week, so where the fashion brands can show their collections. We are very strong in the socialist and later era. We had very strong fashion medias. Especially Mannequin. This was the first media which was totally dedicated to fashion, and the last one was Moda. But I have to emphasize that also other media were covering fashion very strongly, but not just locally, but also outside. Especially Eva Paulin, first fashion journalist. In Tovariš, she was writing critics about the fashion in Firenze, in Florence, in Rome, and in Torino as well, and in Paris, because she was all the time following those events. And in Milan, also one of the media, Bernarda Rakowicz, who later on also took the same attitude. Today, of course, we don't have real fashion media, but we have different television shows with different character. It's called Moda za vas, like Fashion for You. It was a weekly edition of some kind from the 70s, some kind of a television show through over other shows, and we come to the today where the fashion is integrated within television in the culture program, which I think it's very crucial for Slovenian fashion, because in Slovenia fashion is less economic field than is the cultural. It has a cultural value. Of course, we cannot in contemporary we cannot go over bloggers. They are also strongly integrated in Slovenian fashion. Some of those names were written. We had professional association or professional bodies, which you can see were already, some of the strongest were developed in the 50s. But today, as you will see, none of them is operating anymore, and none of the new one is established. So we are in the like a gray zone. Educational institutions, as I said, the first one was established in the 1960s, followed on the secondary level also in the 90s in Maribor. But very important one was the the important one was that one established in the University of Ljubljana in 1979. So shortly, the analysis of contextualization of Slovenian fashion, I divided through those 7 contexts with different, to my knowledge, important segments in which Slovenian fashion really shows its characteristics within each context. The temporal context was very important due to the design awards, which in the time of prior to the independence were very strongly integrated in development of the fashion, but showed this difference that we still felt that in Belgrade were considered as a foreign awards, like gaining award, like being outside of domestic award, which is very funny at the time because it was one country, but still it felt, some of the fashion designers, they say it was like that. Today we are facing with less awards, which they don't mean much in fashion. The comparison of number of awards between Ljubljana and Belgrade fashion fairs also show that some were very highly regarded in Ljubljana, but they were less appreciated in Belgrade fair. Those are the names within names of the fashion designers over the time within those important brands that sadly they don't exist anymore. Geographical context, I connected with Slovenian fashionista. I called fashionista because it was fashion that was different to like in the East, following trends, but not completely. It was connected with the Slovenian fashion designer and has to do with consumer participation and has to do with a local taste, which was very restrained all the time and still is, and all the fashion designers could just say yes to this restrained local taste. DIY, do-it-yourself, is a very important way of dealing with fashion within Slovenia, and was covered by printed media, by factories, integrated in factories, and also involvement in the design process. And comparisons with trends, there are very strong lines that shows that Slovenia fashion was not really unfollowing the trends through all this long period after the Second World War. Economic context, I overview through the production, distribution, and consumption. And here, because of the specific characteristics in Slovenian fashion, I had to integrate media, although it would be much more convenient to place it in the cultural context. But within the Slovenian fashion, the media is very highly it's highly integrated in the economic context, because if you're not in the media, if media doesn't make you visible, then actually you hardly can exist in the Slovenian fashion. Those are some ways how they place in the media fashion. In most cases, this is just the designer's profile and the product guide. So those are the covers over the time of the most important media in Slovenia, and some of the bloggers and influencers who are in general taking 5 to 8 photos per styling. They use from 100 to 130 words, and always they signed designer on or brand. I also looked at, although this distribution was not the very important part of the research, but still the department stores were important for development of the fashion stores, of the fashion field in Slovenia, which is significant. The one of the department stores was established by the 16 factories, so they did realize they do need the distribution if they want to be successful on the market. Later, also the concept stores were developed, because those department stores, I think none of them in this kind of form exists anymore. Slovenian fashion in changing social context, socialism. In socialism, there was inclusion of factories in the local environment very strongly. Also had modest impact on social stratification, clothing, social and certification, strengthening the social position of women, and it was there was a low educational structure. And what is also for me interesting, that the modeling was a profession at the time, not as it is now. This is just some side income. And in the post-socialist time, transition capitalism, I call this for the fashion is the marker of the social stratification. We have a higher education structure all over the fashion, and we market fashion designer as a product, not the collections, but the fashion designers. Political context, it's the image of the Easter of fashion that we cannot ignore. Also the strategic decision for the orientation towards the industrialization of the society, and there were crucial state interventions throughout the period, even later on after the independence, and which is interesting. Also, the site visits by the politicians happened not just in the socialist time, but also in the first years in the 90s. Politicians were part of the fairs, of the happenings in fashion, so they were visiting also those events. But we didn't use fashion diplomacy, which I think would be very grateful for promoting the fashion design. But we are very modest in political commentary in fashion design. Fashion designers do not enter this field using fashion design and visualization as some kind of a political commentary. Just few of them, like Grcic, Lorber, Hrga, and Almira Sadar, in some cases are really using this political commentary. And in cultural context, I already talked about these connections between the art, design and production. This was in the early 70s. Later on in the 80s, another example of cooperating fine artists with the clothing industry, following by Pro Art Slovenija, who again connected with fine art, and even the Slovenian Association of Fine Art Societies did their own hand-painted fashion line in 2014. In Slovenia, there are different levels of combining art into the fashion, but I think the main one is this one, that fashion designers work as costume designers at the same time. This is very unique in Slovenian case because they have to if they want to survive on the market. So costume design versus fashion, there are some examples on this. Clothing as an art object, also in the fashion we have some examples. And in the lately we have identity and clothing form some very interesting fashion designers that are entering this field and combining art into the fashion. Sustainable practice in fashion Slovenia are, of course, now very, very strong due to the short clothing production chains, outsourcings of the production, in lifetime clothing services and repair options. Also sustainable practices are characterized by poor textile self-sufficiency. From 70s on already we are struggling with that, and lack of information about the supply and production chains, so the transparency of it doesn't exist, and user involvement in the design process. Some of them, those are the names which are very, they market themselves as sustainable. They use some sustainable strategies, but we cannot really call them in general just sustainable. But we have some interesting sustainable business initiatives, and I think they are some kind of ground for being able to build fashion, Slovenian fashion identity. Shirting is one of them. The other one is already before Things I Miss, designed in a prints. Then we have Billy Van Style. This was a pilot project also connected with the distribution of fashion. Hiška, a very newly brand, also showed at the latest Ljubljana Fashion Week. And the Suist Appetite, which of course I think it's the youngest among them, this brand. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward for any questions.
Thank you so much. That was kind of like a crash course into Slovene fashion from 1945 onwards. I for one am impressed. And my understanding and my reading of what you've said, kind of like the fashion really reached its peak before the collapse of Yugoslavia. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it had a very much female face.
Almost all of them. Some of them were, of course, also male designers, but in fashion, female.
Over to you. I'm sure you're bursting with questions, and the listeners online or the viewers online are also entirely welcome to shoot some questions, ping some questions. Do we have anything from online? Yes or no?
Not yet.
Not yet. So while we warm up, I'll open questions to the audience. Yes, Barbara Krantz, please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the insights. I'm curious from where the trends in the 70s came from, or the information, where they were actually gathering. Were they traveling a lot abroad?
Yes, they were.
Because I was sort of very young at that age still, so I can sort of relate to that period. But I'm curious, when I saw the designs of Gorenjska oblačila, I'm pretty much very impressed. So you can elaborate on that one. And the second one, if I can have. where are all the archives stored? Is this all gone for good? Because yeah, it's very sad to see so many great brands just disappearing.
Yeah, great and crucial question. Thank you. The last one, the archive, many of the archive is gone, is in the landfills somewhere. When of the clothing companies, when the clothing companies bankrupt, they didn't acknowledge the importance of the authorship, of the know-how, of the design as something that you have to appreciate. And they just like said, okay, those are just the papers, we're gonna throw them away, and also the clothing and everything. There are rare examples where people who understood at the time what that means, and one of them was the director of the library of in Vrhnika. She knew that there was industry of leather in Vrhnika, Industriozna Vrhnika. There was a great library. They had many patents also at the time, and somehow she gained some funds to buy, and now is a part of the library. But still, there are no patterns, no major designs, everything gone. From some of the factories, some of the companies, they did donate those sketches to archives, especially at Gorenjska. They have from Triglav, for some companies, I won't be bothering you now with all those names, but they do have. Which is a shame that all those awards are somewhere, nobody knows where they are. Some of the fashion designers, they did take, but they were not allowed at the time to take because they were employees. They were all employees, except from the first one in Almira, Vesna Gavarchik. She started to work and design for Almira in 1968. And she said, I don't want to be employee. I will be like outsourcing. And she was still 2002, and she's the only example working like that, because all those ladies were working like in factories, from 6 to 2 o'clock. So the designer had to come at 6 o'clock in the morning and started to be very creative and so on. So she said, no, I don't want to work like that. But she was the only one. So she was allowed to have all this archive. And I think she's the only one in Slovenia that really has a great archive on her own. And some years ago, she asked the local museum in Radovljica if they would, being willing to take some of that archive, and they said yes. Also in Murska Sobota, there's the same case where the designer Zdenko Ščančar for Mura did the same, but the problem is that they are just there. I mean, they're not for the public use. I mean, if you know somebody and ask, of course, they will try to help you. Sorry, yeah. I was
just cut short.
Yeah, no.
I think there was another question here in terms of the influence of foreign influence, but we can talk about that. I'll just check if there's other questions.
Okay, I will quickly answer. Yes, they were going outside from early on, and they were following all the fairs.
No, people from Yugoslavia were allowed to travel.
Yes, they were. All the fashion designers were allowed to go, and they were following all the fairs, and companies paid all the expenses.
But it's called Eastern fashion.
I know. Therefore, I mean, it's completely wrong. Must say, like loudly.
But what you also suggesting kind of really shows and captures really nice the gist of the political economy of the time, and I think a colleague Marko Zajc here would be able to talk about political economy and how the investments looked like at the time. And I think fashion industry was definitely not high on the priority list because it was really highly feminized as well.
Yeah, that's true. Also, later on, the incomes were very low for the industry comparing to other industries. But also this comes from the educational level because they were not highly educated. But here I have to say just shortly that the companies realized they have to to higher the educational level, so they started to establish their own secondary school. First within their companies, and then later on also outside. So they tried to really to educate their own employees. But as there was written in one of the articles, like the social feminization was much more developed than the family feminization, because husbands in some cases didn't allow them to go to schools, and they have to ask them whether they can attend.
I have so many comebacks on this, but like I'm sure Isabella over there would also have a few to add in terms of feminist issues of the time. Nessa, do we have any further questions from Zoom? No. So are there any other questions in the room? Any comments?
I actually have a question, maybe that touches a later period, at the beginning, transition period. What happened with those people? And I'm talking about my generation. What happened with those people? They started to educate themselves in the 90s, and they became fashion designers. And I recognize a couple of them. I mean, they went outside, some went to art, some went abroad. But how did they survive? Already started with this kind of costume design, or they just left, I don't know, because it was an infrastructure. They started a perspective business, perspective kind of trade that they were used to, and then by the time they were finished, it was like there was no opportunity, at least in the local side.
Yeah, most of them didn't go to the industry, but the growth of independent studios was high then in the 90s. And now we are facing another problem. This was just the hype of the time. They were like, everything was still working. We still had the media, fashion media, which doesn't really exist at the time. We still have at the time some of the companies and the association which was established, and fashion shows and the fashion fair. So the structure of the fashion system still existed, like the ruins from the previous time. And then we entered another phase where none of the clothing industry exists, and many of those designers are entering this fashion landscape, but more or less only quarter of them lives out of the fashion design. So they are trying to get income from graphic design, for costume design, for being employed in the museums or educational system, or somewhere that they teach. Only quarter of them really live out of the fashion. And this brings another question, just the late fashion fair that finished. More or less, if you were following or anybody was following it, they once a year happens. And majority of them are able to produce 10 looks per year, which is like, what?
Is that a lot or not?
Nothing. It's that, how can you live out of, the whole year out of 10 clothing? Of course, they make them custom made and everything, but this is the main problem: the financing, the policies which force those fashion designers to be registered in Slovenia. They're registered. I don't know where this exists anywhere. It's the worker in the culture, something like that is called. It's
freelance?
Not. Oh yeah, it is freelance, but it's not a freelance because they have the limitation how much money they can earn per year. Even they cannot apply for some grants for the prototyping and so on. So they cannot employ anyone. So and majority of them, they have this kind of legal form. So I think that this 90s you're speaking of, this was a big hope. Still, you could show your work, you could be present in the media, and also the society was still very fond of Slovenian fashion. they recognized as an importance, as a social stratification that, you know, if I'm wearing certain label, I'm having some kind of identity within this within the system. So I think now now is the harder time for the Slovenian fashion.
That's a very grim
Just
ending, but I think it really shows also the lack of clear vision in terms of investment strategies and kind of keeping Slovene industry alive. Yes, can it be a short question, a very short answer?
A very short.
Yeah, very short.
Was there any attempt to integrate self-management into fashion? Was there any impact that you saw of self-management into how fashion worked in
We have
socialist
time.
Slovenia?
How long?
Apparently we have time, so I can have a longer.
I wanted to let you go because I know there's a rush hour in Slovenia. Okay, so are you still okay for another 10 minutes? If you need to leave, please feel free to go. Else, you can answer properly, Tanja, and you can finish your question. I do apologize. Go.
I have a second one if we have more time.
No, just go.
Apparently we do.
Self-management, if it has any impact, if you found any impact into the way things were done here, not just that it was East, but it was Yugoslavia. So,
Like, what do you mean in self-management in the socialist time?
yeah.
For the fashion designers? No, they were part of the companies. So they were integrated. Nobody knew who they were. They were just workers. And there are even some, even those who were remotely, just slightly being in the media, they stopped working for the companies. So the name of the company itself was the subject. And all the others were workers. Therefore, also the fashion designers had to come at 6 o'clock because they were like workers, like any other worker. Yeah, working on their own. But if you're talking now, it's another question. There's one-man brands.
One woman or one man.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, one woman or one man brand. But all again, mostly women. Yeah, although it is changing now. It is changing. Also in the educational system, it is changing. Prior to that, first years of the secondary school, just females. This was still like, because before the fashion design program, women were, all those first like designers, they were finishing a 3-year school called school for the women. It was like weaving and needles and sewing and something that is proper for women to be educated in. And later on, so all of those women who finished this school then entered into the fashion immediately, and later on developed the higher education also.
So the school of the school of design still exists in Ljubljana, and still actually there are still places you can still enroll into the school of design and of graphic design, which is the same school.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
And it's still there. There's still interest
in the same building.
In the same building, which yes, you're struggling, and they're struggling to save that and cheering for that. And I was just wondering, this were there any talk about abolishing school?
Which on the secondary?
The secondary school.
Can I just take another question and then you can answer? There was another question from
No, I think it's fine.
Just ask and then Tanja will
I'm
answer.
uncomfortable. Can we just go organically?
Sure.
Okay. Last year there were. I was also part of one project. We were assessing the whole design structure of education, where we are, how we are managing this, also not just fashion design, but design in general, and also comparing to other countries in Europe with the same, like we were comparing also with the Croatia. So, because we were coming from the same level of education where we are now, where they are, and we are comparing with Finland. And there are big differences. How we approaching towards educational process, if I'm just focusing on fashion design, and integrating some sustainable approaches, sustainable didactics, methodologies, and also thinking about what fashion today means, because those educational programs are very old-fashioned. They are still running like we have a big industry, but we don't. So, the whole structure we have to change and give them new competencies, new knowledges, new skills for the environment they are entering then later on. So abolishing, no, but changing, yes.
So I have maybe two questions. The first is whether you have interviewed some of the designers from the socialist period, and if yes, if you can tell us a bit about how they speak about this period. I imagine that they do a lot of comparison with the present, but maybe there is something specific to how they describe their experiences back then. And the second question has to do with this schooling as skilling. So as far as I understand from the Romanian context that I'm researching, these are professional schools that by increasing the skilling of workers and also contributed to increasing wages and so on. So women were quite willing to go to these schools, but also there was competition. So the party kind of decided who would go to these schools because they were taken out of production in order to do these studies. And I was just wondering how this was working in Slovenia. Do you know a bit more about this process?
So the first question...
Because I couldn't hear it. Could you repeat it also for the online listeners?
Okay. So the first question was whether I did the interviews with all those fashion designers from the socialist era. Yes, I did. And I also filmed them and I produced, this is the beginning, I'm starting a digital archive. So there are short video portraits of today, how they are answering to some questions, and you can also look them. I have this YouTube channel, Fashion Context, where I place some of them. But my intention is, of course, to even get them more of them. At the moment, I have roughly 40 of them. So it was very challenging also to get in contact with them. Some of them I do have contacts, but they don't want to be filmed. So I started to think about just to make them like the audio recording somehow, to make them visible in a way or hearable. So yes, I'm doing it, but the most, and also you asked some interesting parts. They're not interesting but sad parts, and maybe I'm asking you or you also, how they felt. They are all big anger, regret and sorrow. So some of them started to cry when they mentioned the name of the factory, because most of them worked for the whole life, and they maybe I didn't mention, but those factories were really integrated into the social environment where they were placed. Today we would say they were socially responsible, but they really were. They were supporting cultural events, libraries, sport events, sport associations. They were even being industry, this industry of leather Vrhnika. They had their own collection of fine arts. So they were building and trying to fulfill gap with the housing. They even had in Beti, they had their own hairdresser. Not to mention that they have own general practitioners within the company. So they were really sustainable at the time, but just didn't know how to. It was common way to do it. So for those fashion designers today, it's a big sorrow and and in some cases anger, and for me it was hard to see sometimes, and I felt that I have to film them, I have to give them voice, I have to place them and give them some respect in the overall history of Slovenian fashion, because they all know for Mura, for Almira, for those names of the companies, but behind those companies, there were names, there were people, there were communities working for it. You know, it was just the name for the company they were working. And second questions that you raised about the education of those women within the factories, they educated after their work. So they worked, plus they had to go to school. So it was very hard for them. Therefore, because they were young women, they all had families, children, husbands, you know, and they had to ask, I mean, they had to fulfill this, at the time, this social role, you know, being as a part of the mother, being a mother, being a wife, and it was hard for them. And there is one statistic fact which I remember, that some company, but it doesn't matter, when they gave the opportunity, so they could apply for the educational program, only 1% of all those eligible just applied, just 1%. So, I mean, they wanted, but there were many other circumstances why they couldn't. But nevertheless, at the end, this level of education really was leveling up. So finally, they did reach what they wanted to accomplish. But it wasn't, I mean, for them, probably, I imagine, it was very hard at the time. You know, in small communities, because more or less those schools and those companies were in small communities, you know, you have to live in those communities, and it wasn't that, you know, wasn't that easy.
Any other? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I just have one pretty broad question about the period before the 90s. So you mentioned that when Slovenian designers were getting an award in Belgrade, it felt like getting an international award. So I would be interested to hear a bit more about the relationship between designers in Slovenia and in the other Yugoslav republics, specifically in like this period in the mid 80s. So already when there was this cultural boom, but at the same time this economic restriction, and if there was any kind of shifts during this period, or just anything in general.
No, they really appreciate each other, and they collaborated. So even now, when I was 2 years ago in Serbia, meeting another fashion designer, very important at the time. Another story, I won't get into it, and I mentioned some of those names, and she said, "Oh, how lovely! Please give her greetings. I haven't heard from." So no, they really collaborated and worked together. What I meant, they said always like, and also it was written in some articles, like, you know, we are getting it is not at home. You know, we are getting somewhere else. But also because in Belgrade, this fair was really international. So people like from Kjakaden or Pakorban, or, you know, the names, the luxury names and the names of designers really came into Belgrade at that time. And therefore, Labot was producing for the label Dior shirts, you know, from, I don't know, which year, from the 60s on. So big names really came to Belgrade, and those awards really meant a bit more than in Ljubljana, because it was also a smaller affair. And secondly, which I think it's important, already at that time, Yugoslavia was divided in the clothing industry and textile industry in like we would say, in the south and in the north. So the south was producing raw material, and in the north, in Slovenia, we were producing like clothing, like design. So we were integrating in, and some companies, there were a majority of really high design with high design collections were coming from Slovenia. Therefore. And there were some rare also in other names with a very, very highly regarded fashion designers, but not as many in Slovenia. Therefore, in 1984, when Olympics were in Sarajevo, the majority of the designs and production was from Slovenia. Just one was from Croatia, because the production and the quality, the know-how was just better at the time. So majority was really, and the whole consortium was mainly from Slovenian fashion designers and one director of one company from Velenje, Modni salon Velenje. Yeah.
What I find curious is how not necessarily geopolitically recognized these brands were. When I moved to Sweden, a lot of my Swedish colleagues were using those, particularly the winter collections, and they just all thought they were Swedish. So that was really funny. I felt like kind of like real national pride for the first time, probably trying to defend the fashion industry of times that passed. So I wonder, based on what you've told us, what's the future of Slovene fashion? Not fashion in Slovenia, but Slovene fashion.
Yeah, abroad, huh? How can we...
Generally,
What is? We are talking with my colleagues. We can be a hub for new sustainable strategies, because the sustainable strategies are made for big companies, for large-scale fashion economies. But for small scales, and especially, I think, colleagues said that she's from Romania, from countries where fashion and industry has been challenged with this big change. I think we have to think, and therefore we have certain characteristics like lifelong repairs, small production lanes, very transparent production. Also, we know each other very well, so it is not, you don't give to someone just as a workforce, but you really build communities. And I think in this sense, we can build a very like a project, like some hub for new ideas. Like I said, for like those business initiatives, each of them has some certain characteristics which could be then enlarged with, maybe some modifications, but nevertheless gives the example how we can progress further on in fashion business, because fashion business is really hard industry. It's, probably among the hardest in many ways, also regardless the communities, the social interactions, the economies, the environment, the culture, the preservation of cultural heritage, because we all dress regardless the culture, our own cultural heritage. We are dressed very generic, universal clothing.
Yes.
So I think that here Slovenia has perspective, but of course with the support of proper politics, strategies, and also some grants who will help to build those brands and this fashion, Slovenian fashion identity.
So slowing down, kind of like slower production to slower academia as well, right? Let's slow down, let's slow down. And on that note, we don't have anything online, right? No comments, no. Okay, so on that note, Tanja Devetak from Ljubljana Fashion Week, straight to Ines. I really appreciate it. I've really learned a lot. I hope you did too. Thank you so much for coming over, meeting us and giving us a crash course in Slovene fashion. And thanks to you all in the room and online for joining us for this interesting talk. Tanja Devetak, the next session will be probably a social sciencey one, because I want to learn more about the workers in fashion industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.